The valley whispered with secrets. Ghost stood at the edge of a ridge whine combing through his silver mane dust clinging to his dappled coat. The Mustang's amber eyes tracked the movement of hawks circling overhead, but his thoughts if horses could indeed think in ways humans might understand were elsewhere. A dull pain throbbed in his left hind leg. He'd learned to bear it, shifting his weight slightly to ease the pressure. The injury had never properly healed. Ghost wasn't like the other wild horses. He kept to himself, lingering at the edges of the herd, never competing for mares or leadership. The others seemed to sense his difference, giving him a wide berth, even as they allowed him to follow along the ancient migration paths. Something pulled at him, a memory that wasn't quite his own. The desert stretched before him, vast and unforgiving, but beautiful in its harsh simplicity. Hoofprints scattered across the sand told stories of journeys coming and going, fleeing and returning. Ghost's own tracks wove among them, meandering rather than purposeful. He didn't remember where he came from. Not exactly. But sometimes when he closed his eyes against the setting sun, images flickered behind his eyelids, metal corridors gleaming under harsh lights, the scent of antiseptic and a man's voice low and urgent, whispering, "Remember the way back." Ghost shook his head as if to clear it, his ears flicking back and forth. These weren't his memories. They belonged to another, a horse called Echo. But how he knew this name he couldn't say. He only knew that Echo's presence lingered within him like a shadow. Night fell across the valley. The herds settled together for warmth and protection, but Ghost remained apart. His gaze lifted toward the stars. Something about their cold light comforted him, as if they were signposts to a destination he had yet to discover. In his dreams, the images came more clearly. Echo, a Mustang with identical markings to his own, standing in a metal room. Men in uniforms moving around him. Tests, needles. And then finally a different man with kind eyes leading Echo away, murmuring, "They'll never understand what they've done to you." Ghost woke with a start, his hide twitching. The pre-dawn air carried a mechanical sound, the whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopter blades. The herd was already moving, startled by the intrusion. Bureau of Land Management roundups were common enough. The wild horses had learned to fear the sound of engines and rotors. But this felt different. Ghost hesitated, watching as the others fled. A flash of movement caught his eye. A foal separated from its mother had stumbled into a narrow ravine. The helicopter was closing in. He shouldn't have gone back. The drive to survive to run was overwhelming. But instead, Ghost wheeled around, galloping toward the trapped youngster. The tiny horse whinnied in fear as Ghost approached. He nudged the foal, gently urging it up the ravine bank. The helicopter swooped lower. Ghost reared, placing himself between the machine and the foal. The downdraft from the rotors kicked up a cloud of dust and debris. Something sharp struck his hoof, a piece of metal from a broken fence line perhaps. Pain shot up his leg. He stumbled but kept pushing the foal forward until it broke free, racing toward the distant herd. Ghost tried to follow, but his injured leg gave way. He watched as the helicopter passed overhead, focused on the main group, leaving him behind. By nightfall, he was alone, and limping badly, the metal shards still embedded in his hoof. Each step sent fresh agony up his leg. He traveled slowly, driven by instinct more than direction. Days passed. The wound festered. Ghost grew weaker, but something kept him moving, an invisible thread pulling him forward. Then, as the sun began to set on the third day, he crested a small rise and saw it, a dilapidated ranch house nestled against the foothills. Something about it sent a tremor through his body. The scent was familiar. Familiar, yet painful. Ghost approached, cautiously, drawn by an impulse he couldn't name. The fence line was broken in places, the paint on the barn faded to a ghostly red. A single porch light cast a small pool of yellow against the gathering darkness. He stopped at the fence line, nostrils flaring. There was water here, food perhaps, and something else. Something he'd been seeking without knowing. As twilight deepened into night, Ghost remained by the fence, watching, waiting for what he didn't know. Mason Foster sat on the porch steps, a lukewarm cup of coffee forgotten in his weathered hands. 62 years had etched deep lines into his face, mapping a journey through terrain, both physical and emotional. The old ranch house creaked and settled around him, struggling against the inevitability of decay. Just like him, Mason thought wryly. He hadn't planned to return. When Eleanor's lawyer called with news of her death, Mason had intended to handle the paperwork, remotely sell the property, and continue his quiet retirement in the small apartment he'd rented after leaving the military. But something had drawn him back to the family ranch. Perhaps a need for closure, or maybe just the stubborn Foster sense of responsibility. Eleanor had fought cancer alone, never once asking for his help. The least he could do was properly close this chapter of their family story. He set his coffee down and pulled out an old photograph from his shirt pocket. The edges were worn smooth from handling the colors faded by time. Two young men in military uniforms stood side by side, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Behind them, partially visible, was a dappled Mustang. Alex and Mason, the Foster brothers before everything changed. Mason traced his thumb over his brother's face. 40 years gone, and the pain still felt fresh. The official story that Lieutenant Alex Foster had abandoned his post, deserting during a classified military operation, had never sat right with Mason. Not with the Alex he knew, but the military had been adamant the record sealed, and a young Mason himself, just starting his career as a military medic, had been left with nothing but questions and a slowly festering anger. "I should have believed in you," Mason whispered to the photograph. The sound of something moving outside pulled him from his thoughts. He squinted into the darkness beyond the porch light. For a moment he saw nothing. Then a shape materialized near the broken fence line. A horse, wild by the look of it, standing motionless watching the house. Mason set the photo aside and slowly rose to his feet. Wild Mustangs weren't uncommon in this part of Nevada, but they typically avoided human habitation unless desperate. He stepped off the porch, moving unhurriedly so as not to startle the animal. As he drew closer, details emerged: a dusty silver coat with distinctive dark dappling, a tangled mane, and an injury to the left hind leg. The horse was favoring it, barely putting weight on the hoof. "Hello there," Mason said softly, stopping several yards away. The Mustang's ears pricked forward at the sound of his voice. It didn't flee, which surprised Mason. Instead, it seemed to study him, its amber eyes reflecting the distant porch light. Mason felt an odd sensation, as if he were being evaluated, measured in some way he couldn't understand. The feeling was so strong it stopped him in his tracks. For a long moment, neither moved. Man and horse, separated by yards of dusty earth and decades of divergent experiences, simply regarded each other. Then, as if having reached some private conclusion, the Mustang turned and limped away into the darkness. Mason remained where he stood, listening to the receding sound of hoofbeats. Something about the encounter left him unsettled. Those eyes had seemed almost familiar. He shook off the thought and returned to the porch, gathering his coffee cup and the photograph. Tomorrow would bring more work sorting through Eleanor's belongings, assessing what repairs the ranch needed before it could be put on the market. But as he closed the door behind him, Mason couldn't shake the image of those intelligent amber eyes watching him from the darkness. Dawn broke clear and cool over Pine Creek Valley. Mason rose, early years of military routine, ingrained too deeply to allow for lazy mornings, even in retirement. He made a pot of coffee and carried a mug out to the porch, surveying the property in the cold morning light. The ranch had seen better days. The fences needed mending, the barn roof had several missing shingles, and the windmill that once pumped water for the livestock creaked ominously with each turn. Eleanor had done her best, but maintaining a working ranch was hard for a woman alone, especially one fighting cancer. Mason sighed. He'd been so wrapped up in his own life, his own pain, that he'd let their relationship wither. Now it was too late for apologies. Movement near the eastern fence line caught his eye. The wild horse from last night had returned. It stood approximately where Mason had seen it before its gaze fixed on the house. Mason set his coffee down and walked to the edge of the porch. The Mustang's condition looked worse in daylight, ribs showing beneath the dull coat, the injured leg clearly causing significant pain. "You came back," Mason said. The horse's ears swiveled toward his voice, but it made no move to leave. Mason considered his options. He wasn't planning to stay long enough to take on a horse, especially a wild one. The responsible thing would be to call the Bureau of Land Management to collect it, but something held him back. The animal was injured, likely separated from its herd, and there was that strange sense of familiarity that Mason couldn't quite shake. "Hungry?" he asked, knowing the horse couldn't understand him, but speaking anyway. "I might have something you'd like." He retreated inside, returning moments later with a slightly wizened apple from the nearly empty refrigerator. Moving slowly, Mason approached the fence line, stopping several yards away. He held out the apple on his flattened palm. "Here you go," he said quietly. "Don't take my fingers with it." The Mustang watched him, nostrils flaring, as it caught the scent of the fruit. After a moment's hesitation, it took a cautious step forward, then another. Mason remained perfectly still. Finally, the horse stretched its neck across the remaining distance. Velvety lips carefully lifted the apple from Mason's palm, retreating quickly to munch on the unexpected treat. "You've been around people before," Mason observed. "Most truly wild horses wouldn't have approached so boldly, especially not an injured one." As the Mustang ate, Mason took the opportunity to study it more closely. It was a stallion, he noted, probably around 10 years old. The dappled pattern on its coat was distinctive, forming almost symmetrical markings across its flanks. But what caught Mason's attention was a small area behind the horse's left ear, what looked like a series of numbers or letters, partially obscured by its mane. The horse finished the apple and lifted its head once again, fixing Mason with that penetrating stare. There was something almost unnerving about the intelligence in those eyes. "What's your story?" Mason asked softly. The stallion snorted, pawing at the ground with its right front hoof. Then, to Mason's surprise, it turned and gazed toward the distant mountains, the Echo Canyon range that bordered the eastern edge of the valley. "Ghost," Mason said suddenly, the name coming to him unbidden. "That's what I'll call you, because you kind of appeared out of nowhere." The horse ghost swung its head back around at the sound ears, pricked forward as if in approval. Mason shook his head at his own whimsy. He was anthropomorphizing a wild animal, attributing human characteristics to what was simply instinctive behavior. Still, the name felt right somehow. "That leg needs looking at," he continued, nodding toward the injury. "I'm no vet, but even I can see it's bad." Ghost took a step backward, as if understanding Mason's words and expressing reluctance. Then he turned once more toward Echo Canyon, this time with such deliberate movement that Mason almost laughed. "What you want me to follow you out there? Not happening, buddy." Mason raised his hands in mock surrender. "I've got enough problems right here." Ghost pawed at the ground again, more insistently this time. Then he limped away, not toward the open range as Mason expected, but along the fence line, following its perimeter toward the old barn. Curious despite himself, Mason followed at a distance. Ghost stopped at a section where the fence had partially collapsed, creating a gap just wide enough for a person to step through. The Mustang looked at the gap, then back at Mason, then repeated the motion. "You want me to go through there?" Mason asked incredulously. Ghost nickered softly, the first vocal sound Mason had heard from him. "This is crazy," Mason muttered to himself. But he found himself stepping forward, pushing aside the broken section of fencing and crossing to the other side. Ghost immediately moved a few paces away, maintaining the distance between them. He looked back once more toward Echo Canyon, then took a few limping steps in that direction. "No," Mason said firmly. "I'm not hiking into the wilderness following a wild horse. That's where I draw the line." Ghost seemed to consider this, head tilted slightly as if evaluating Mason's resolve. Then, apparently accepting the refusal, he returned to the fence line, settling into a patch of morning sunlight. He lowered his head, eyes half closed, the picture of equine patience. Waiting, Mason realized. The horse was waiting. Mason returned to the house, unsettled by the encounter, but unsure why. He spent the morning sorting through Eleanor's papers, finding Bill's medical records and correspondence neatly organized in labeled folders. His sister had always been methodical. In her study, Mason discovered a cardboard box marked simply Alex. Inside were newspaper clippings about his brother's disappearance, copies of military correspondence, and a small leather-bound journal. Mason flipped it open to find Eleanor's handwriting detailing her own investigation into what had happened to their older brother. She hadn't believed the desertion story either, and judging by the journal entries, she'd spent years quietly looking for answers. One entry caught Mason's attention, April 15, 2010, met with Joseph Redtree from the Blackfoot Reservation. He remembers stories from his grandfather about Project Echo and the special horses the military was using. Says there's a connection to the water contamination cases on the reservation in the 1970s. Need to follow up. And a later entry, June 3, 2010, found reference to Echo Canyon facility in Old County records. Listed as a temporary military research installation from 1968-1987, officially decommissioned. What were they researching there? Mason sat back, journal in hand. Echo Canyon, the same direction Ghost had been looking toward. Coincidence. A sound from outside drew his attention. He moved to the window and saw Ghost still at the fence line, but now the horse was nickering loudly, head tossing. Mason set the journal aside and went outside. As he approached, he saw the cause of Ghost's distress. His injured leg had begun bleeding again, a small piece of metal protruding from the hoof. "Easy there," Mason said, approaching cautiously. "Let me see." To his surprise, Ghost allowed him to come close, though the horse trembled slightly as Mason knelt to examine the wound. Years of combat medical training took over as Mason assessed the injury. A metal shard embedded in the frog of the hoof, the surrounding tissue inflamed and possibly infected. "This needs professional attention," Mason said, looking up at Ghost. "A vet?" Ghost snorted, shifting his weight uncomfortably. Mason stood, decision made. "I'll be right back." Inside, he found Eleanor's address book and flipped through it, finding a listing for Lily Chen, veterinarian. Mason dialed the number, hoping it was still current. "Redwood Veterinary Clinic." A woman's voice answered. "Hello, this is Mason Foster, Eleanor Foster's brother. I've got an injured horse here that needs attention." There was a pause. "Mr. Foster, I was sorry to hear about Eleanor. She was a good person." "Thank you," Mason said, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that came with condolences. "Did you know her well?" "She brought me cookies every Christmas," the woman replied, a smile in her voice. "And she liked to talk about her military brother who never visited." Mason winced at the gentle rebuke. "That would be me." "What kind of horse problem are we talking about?" Dr. Chen asked, shifting to professional mode. "A wild Mustang. Showed up at the fence line yesterday with an injured leg. There's metal embedded in the hoof, possible infection." "A wild Mustang let you examine its hoof?" Surprise colored her tone. "I know it's strange. This one's different. I can come out this afternoon around 3. Will that work?" "Perfect," Mason said, relieved. "Thank you, Dr. Chen." "Lily, please, your sister never stood on ceremony and neither do I." Mason hung up and returned to the fence line with a bucket of clean water and some old towels. Ghost had moved to the shade of a gnarled oak tree, but limped back to the fence when he saw Mason approach. "Help is coming this afternoon," Mason told him, setting the bucket down. "In the meantime, let's clean this up a bit." Working slowly and gently, Mason bathed the injured leg, careful not to disturb the embedded metal. Ghost flinched occasionally, but remained surprisingly cooperative throughout the process. As Mason worked, he found himself talking, the words flowing more easily to this silent listener than they had to any human in years. "My sister Eleanor died 3 weeks ago. Cancer. I didn't make it back for the funeral." He dipped a cloth in the water, wringing it out. "We weren't close, not for a long time. That's on me, I guess." Ghost's ears swiveled toward Mason's voice, his amber eyes watching intently. "I inherited this place. Not sure what I'm going to do with it yet. Probably sell it," Mason sighed. "Doesn't feel right somehow, but I'm not cut out for ranch life." Ghost lowered his head slightly as if considering Mason's words. "You know what's strange?" Mason continued, gently patting the leg dry. "I was just reading about Echo Canyon in Eleanor's notes. And you keep looking in that direction? Coincidence, huh?" At the mention of Echo Canyon, Ghost's head came up sharply. He nickered the sound almost like a question. Mason frowned. "You know something about that place." Ghost pawed at the ground, then turned once more to gaze toward the distant mountains. Mason shook his head, rising to his feet. "I'm talking to a horse like he can understand me. Maybe I've been alone too long." But as he gathered the supplies and headed back to the house, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Ghost than met the eye, and something about Echo Canyon was calling to both of them. Kier. Dr. Lily Chen arrived precisely at 3, her weathered pickup truck, raising a cloud of dust as it rumbled down the long driveway. She was younger than Mason had expected, mid-40s perhaps, with short black hair and laugh lines around her eyes that suggested a ready smile despite her serious expression. "Mr. Foster," she called, stepping out of the truck with a medical bag in hand. "Mason, please," he responded, walking down from the porch to meet her. "Thank you for coming. Lily's eyes moved past him, widening slightly. Is that him? Mason turned to see Ghost standing about 20 yards away, watching them intently. Yeah, that's Ghost. Ghost. It's what I've been calling him. He's kind of phantom-like, appears and disappears. Lily studied the Mustang with professional interest. He's magnificent. Classic Nevada Mustang stock. And you say he's completely wild. As far as I know, he showed up 2 nights ago. Mason hesitated. There's something strange, though. He seems to understand what I'm saying sometimes, and he's got some kind of mark behind his ear numbers or letters. Lily's expression shifted, a flicker of something Mason couldn't quite identify crossing her features. Let's take a look at that leg first. They approached Ghost slowly. The horse watched them, but didn't retreat. Talk to him, Lily suggested quietly. He seems to respond to your voice. Mason nodded. Hey, Ghost, this is Dr. Chen. She's going to help with that leg. Ghost's ears pricked forward at Mason's voice, his posture relaxing slightly. Lily moved forward with practiced calm, her movements fluid and non-threatening. Hello, beautiful, she murmured, stopping a few feet away. Just want to check that leg of yours. To Mason's amazement, Ghost allowed Lily to approach, only shifting slightly as she knelt to examine the injury. Her hands moved with gentle efficiency, assessing the wound without causing additional distress. The metal needs to come out, she said after a moment. It's not too deep, but there's infection starting. I've brought antibiotics and anti-inflammatories. She returned to her truck, retrieving additional supplies. As she worked, Mason noticed her occasionally glancing at Ghost's head, trying to see the marking he'd mentioned. Can you distract him? She asked. Maybe with another apple. I'd like to check behind his ear. Mason nodded, fetching an apple from the house. When he returned, he held it out, drawing Ghost's attention. As the horse focused on the treat, Lily carefully brushed back the tangled mane behind his left ear. Her sharp intake of breath told Mason she'd found something. What is it? He asked as Ghost took the apple from his hand. Lily stepped back, her expression troubled. E7. It's a tattoo. And it's not a BLM mark. Those are freeze brands, not tattoos, and they have a completely different system. What does it mean? I don't know. She pulled out her phone and took several quick photographs. But I've seen something similar before. Years ago when I was doing my residency with the Military Veterinary Corps. Mason felt a chill that had nothing to do with the afternoon breeze. Military. Lily nodded, her focus returning to Ghost's injury. With quick practiced movements, she extracted the metal shard from the hoof, cleaned the wound thoroughly, and administered injections of antibiotics and pain medication. There, she said, stepping back. That should help. I'll leave you with antibiotics to mix with his feed for the next week. The wound itself isn't severe, but I'm concerned about the infection. Ghost seemed to relax as the pain medication took effect, the tension in his posture easing. He remained close, watching them both with those intelligent eyes. Dr. Chen, Lily. Mason said, would you like some coffee? I'd like to hear more about what you know about that marking. She glanced at her watch, then nodded. I can stay for a bit. They settled on the porch, Mason having made a fresh pot of coffee. Ghost had moved to a patch of grass near the house, grazing contentedly, but always keeping them in sight. You mentioned military experience, Mason prompted once they were seated. Lily cradled her mug between her hands. 3 years with the Army Veterinary Corps. Mostly working with military working dogs, but occasionally with horses used for ceremonial purposes. And you've seen markings like that before? She hesitated, seeming to choose her words carefully. Not exactly like that, but similar coding systems. Alphanumeric identifiers were used in various research programs. Research. Mason's voice sharpened. What kind of research? I don't know specifics. Most of it was classified. Lily set her mug down. Mr. Foster Mason, I should tell you that I left the military under strained circumstances. I raised concerns about certain programs that I felt were ethically questionable. What kind of programs? The kind that push boundaries without sufficient oversight. Her gaze drifted to Ghost. Your Mustang there, he's unusual. Not just the marking, but his behavior. Wild horses don't typically approach humans, especially when injured. They certainly don't allow strangers to handle them as he has. Mason nodded slowly. I know. That's what I've been trying to tell you. There's something different about him. Lily leaned forward. May I ask why you were asking about Echo Canyon earlier? Mason stiffened, instantly on guard. I didn't mention Echo Canyon to you. No, she agreed, but I heard you say it to Ghost while I was walking up. You said he keeps looking in that direction. Mason studied her, trying to gauge her interest. Finally, he decided to take a chance. My sister kept journals. She was investigating what happened to our brother Alex. He disappeared during a military operation 40 years ago, supposedly deserted. There were references to Echo Canyon in her notes, something about a military research facility. Lily's expression remained carefully neutral, but Mason caught a flicker of recognition in her eyes. You know something, he said. It wasn't a question. She sighed, setting her mug down. Rumors mostly. Echo Canyon was allegedly the site of a classified research program in the 70s and 80s. Something to do with biological sensing capabilities using animals to detect environmental changes, too subtle for instruments at the time. McKee, biological sensing. Some animals can naturally detect things humans can't, changes in magnetic fields, minute chemical traces, even early warning signs of natural disasters. The military was reportedly interested in enhancing these abilities for various applications. Mason's mind raced, connecting dots. And you think Ghost might have been part of such a program? But that would be impossible. He's not old enough. No, Lily agreed. But he could be a descendant of animals from the program. Certain traits can be hereditary. They lapsed into silence, both watching Ghost as he grazed peacefully nearby. The sun was beginning to lower toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. I should go, Lily said, finally rising from her chair. I have evening appointments at the clinic. Mason walked her to her truck. As she placed her medical bag inside, Lily turned to him with a serious expression. Mason, be careful with your questions about Echo Canyon. If there was a classified program there may still be people who want to keep it quiet. It was 40 years ago, Mason objected. Some secrets don't have an expiration date, especially if they involve potential violations of environmental regulations or research ethics. She handed him a card. My personal number. Call me if Ghost condition changes or if you find out anything more about that marking. Mason nodded, pocketing the card. Thank you, Lily. As she drove away, Mason turned to find Ghost watching him from across the yard. The Mustang nickered softly as if trying to communicate something urgent. What is it? Mason asked, approaching slowly. Ghost pawed at the ground, then turned once more to gaze toward Echo Canyon. The sun's dying rays caught his silver coat, making it glow like burnished metal. You really want me to go there, don't you? Mason murmured. Ghost tossed his head, the gesture almost human in its emphatic affirmation. Mason sighed, running a hand through his gray-streaked hair. Eleanor was looking into that place. Because of Alex. The mention of his brother's name brought a familiar ache. 40 years of unanswered questions, of doubts and regrets. The official story had never felt right. Alex, with his strict code of honor, simply abandoning his post, impossible. And now this strange, intelligent horse with a military marking was trying to lead Mason to a place his sister had been investigating in connection with Alex's disappearance. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely. Okay, Mason said finally. Tomorrow. If you're up to it, we'll go to Echo Canyon together. Ghost nickered softly, seeming satisfied with this promise. He lowered his head, returning to his grazing as the last light faded from the sky. Inside the house, Mason pulled out Eleanor's journal again, reading her meticulous notes about Echo Canyon. The military installation had been officially decommissioned in 1987, all records sealed under national security protocols. But Eleanor had pieced together fragments, water quality reports from nearby areas showing unusual contaminants, local rumors about strange noises and lights, and most interestingly, a spike in unusual health problems on the Blackfoot Reservation that bordered the eastern perimeter of the facility. One name appeared repeatedly in her later entries, Chief Joseph Blackfeather. Eleanor had apparently consulted with him several times before her illness became too severe to continue her investigation. Mason made a mental note to seek out the chief if their expedition to Echo Canyon yielded anything significant. As he prepared for bed, Mason was struck by how quickly his plans had changed. He'd come to Pine Creek to settle his sister's affairs and sell the ranch. Now, just days later, he was planning to follow a wild horse into the mountains in search of answers to a 40-year-old mystery. Eleanor would have approved, he thought with a sad smile. She always did say he had more of Alex in him than he admitted. Outside, under the cold light of the stars, Ghost stood at the fence line, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains where Echo Canyon waited with its long-buried secrets. Mason woke abruptly in the pre-dawn darkness, heart pounding from a dream he couldn't quite remember. Something about Alex calling his name from deep within a mountain. He sat up, rubbing his face. The luminous dial of his watch showed 4:17 a.m. Too early to start the day, but he knew from experience that sleep wouldn't return now. A soft sound from outside caught his attention, a rhythmic tapping against the back porch steps. Mason pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, grabbing a flashlight before making his way through the dark house. He opened the back door to find Ghost standing at the steps, one front hoof raised, poised to strike the wooden boards again. The Mustang's head came up sharply at Mason's appearance. Ears pricked forward in what looked remarkably like relief. "What's wrong?" Mason asked, scanning the darkness beyond for signs of threat. Ghost nickered urgently, turning in a tight circle before facing toward Echo Canyon. He took several steps in that direction, then looked back expectantly. "Now!" Mason said incredulously. "It's the middle of the night." Ghost whinnied again, more forcefully this time, pawing the ground with obvious agitation. Something in the horse's manner sent a chill down Mason's spine. This wasn't normal animal behavior. Ghost wasn't simply eager for their planned excursion. He seemed genuinely distressed, driven by some urgency Mason couldn't comprehend. "All right," Mason said, decision made. "Give me 5 minutes." He dressed quickly, pulling on hiking boots and a jacket. He filled a canteen with water-stuffed energy bars into his pockets, and after a moment's consideration, retrieved Eleanor's journal and the revolver she had kept in her bedside drawer. Better safe than sorry. When he returned to the porch, Ghost was waiting, his entire posture radiating impatience. As soon as Mason descended the steps, the Mustang turned and began walking purposefully toward the gap in the fence. "I'm trusting you," Mason told him, climbing through the broken fencing. "I hope you know what you're doing." Ghost set a surprisingly rapid pace given his injury, leading Mason across the dry pasture and into the scrubby wilderness beyond. The first hints of dawn were just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, providing enough illumination to navigate without the flashlight. They walked for nearly an hour, the terrain growing increasingly rugged as they approached the foothills of Echo Canyon. Ghost seemed to know exactly where he was going, picking a path that avoided the worst of the rough ground. As they climbed higher, Mason began to notice oddities in the landscape, subtle signs of past human activity amid the natural formations. A two-straight line cut into a hillside, concrete footings partially hidden by decades of vegetation, metal debris half buried in the soil. "There was something here," Mason murmured, pausing to examine a rusted piece of chain-link fencing protruding from beneath a boulder. Ghost nickered impatiently, continuing forward. The Mustang stopped at the top of a steep rise, waiting for Mason to catch up. When Mason crested the hill, he found himself looking at a narrow cleft in the mountainside, a natural formation, but with unnatural elements. The entrance was partially obscured by vegetation, but Mason could make out the edges of a metal door set into the rock face. "What is this place?" he whispered. Ghost pawed at the ground near the entrance. Mason approached cautiously, heart pounding. The metal door was weathered and rusted, but still solid. A faded symbol was stenciled in the corner, a military insignia Mason didn't recognize. "This is government property," Mason said, hesitation in his voice. "We shouldn't be here." Ghost snorted, nudging at a pile of rocks that had accumulated at the base of the door. Mason knelt, brushing away dirt and stones, to reveal a tarnished metal box half buried in the soil. With trembling hands, Mason pried open the lid. Inside was a military ID card, cracked and faded with age. The photo was weathered but unmistakable. Alex Foster. "How is this possible?" Mason's voice cracked, his flashlight beam wavering as his hand began to shake. "Alex, you were here." Beneath the ID card lay a sealed envelope with Mason's name written on it in his brother's distinctive handwriting. Mason looked up at Ghost, whose intelligent eyes seemed to hold secrets beyond understanding. "How did you know this was here?" Ghost merely blinked, then turned his attention to the door. Mason rose, tucking the envelope into his pocket, and approached the entrance. The door was locked, but decades of exposure had weakened the frame. He pushed, feeling resistance at first, then a sudden give, as ancient hinges protested. The beam of his flashlight revealed a narrow corridor leading deeper into the mountain, a military installation of some kind long abandoned. Ghost limped forward confidently as if he had been here before. "Wait!" Mason called, but the Mustang had already disappeared into the darkness ahead. Taking a deep breath, Mason stepped across the threshold into the facility that might hold answers to his brother's fate. The musty odor of stale air hit him as he moved deeper into the corridor. His flashlight beam cut through decades of darkness, revealing concrete walls lined with rusted pipes. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, each drop echoing in the silence. Mason followed Ghost's hoof prints in the dust, tracking the Mustang's path through the abandoned complex. The narrow passage opened into a larger chamber, what appeared to have been a central operations room. Metal filing cabinets stood against one wall, their drawers partially open as if someone had left in a hurry. A large table dominated the center of the room, scattered with yellowed papers and maps. Ghost stood waiting at the far side near another doorway. As Mason approached, his flashlight beam caught a faded sign on the wall, Project Echo classified. Level 4, clearance only. Project Echo, Mason murmured. Not Echo Canyon. The canyon was named after the project. He moved to the table, carefully lifting one of the maps. It showed the surrounding area with Echo Canyon marked in red. Several locations on the Blackfoot Reservation were circled with coordinates and dates written in the margins. Ghost made a soft sound, drawing Mason's attention. The Mustang had moved to a desk in the corner and was nudging at a drawer with his muzzle. Mason crossed the room, pulling open the stiff drawer. Inside lay a leather journal, its cover cracked with age. Opening it, Mason felt his heart stop. The handwriting was unmistakable, Alex's neat, precise letters. April 15, 1971. Mason read aloud, his voice echoing in the empty room. They've expanded testing to Site C without proper containment protocols. Soil samples show contamination extending beyond the test boundary. General Harmon insists the levels are acceptable, but Dr. Wilson disagrees. I've documented everything, but I'm not sure who I can trust with this information. Mason's hands trembled as he turned the page. May 3, 1971. Water samples from Eagle Creek show trace elements consistent with radioactive seepage. The reservation water supply could be affected. When I presented my findings, Colonel Barnes suggested I was overreacting. They're covering something up. I've contacted Senator Richards' office, but I'm not sure my messages are getting through. Mason lowered himself onto a dusty chair, mind racing. These weren't the ramblings of a deserter. These were the notes of a soldier who'd discovered something dangerous, something people wanted to keep hidden. Alex, Mason whispered, what did you get yourself into? Ghost nickered softly, drawing Mason's attention to a filing cabinet labeled Personnel. The drawer stuck at first, then gave way with a metallic groan. Inside were dozens of folders. Mason pulled out the one labeled Foster A. The file contained Alex's service record, performance evaluations, and transfer orders to Special Project Echo due to his background in environmental science, a detail Mason had forgotten. At the back of the folder was a photograph that made his blood run cold. It showed Alex standing outside the facility, and beside him was a horse, a young Mustang, with distinctive markings identical to Ghost's. Written on the back in faded ink was Alex with Echo 1971. Cool, Mason breathed, looking up at Ghost in astonishment. That's impossible. You can't be the same horse. That would make you over 50 years old. Ghost merely blinked, those intelligent eyes revealing nothing. Mason's flashlight beam caught something else, a door marked Lab. It was ajar, darkness yawning beyond. Mason approached cautiously, pushing it open with a creak of protest. The laboratory was large, with counters lined with dusty equipment and glass containers. At the center stood what appeared to be examination tables, one sized for humans, another clearly meant for animals. They were experimenting on horses, Mason whispered, a coldness spreading through his chest. Ghost remained in the doorway, refusing to enter. The horse's ears were flattened, body tense. Something about this place clearly disturbed him. Carefully, Mason examined the lab. Most of the equipment was unrecognizable to him, but file boxes labeled Test Subjects lined one wall. He pulled one down, coughing, as dust billowed around him. Inside were countless reports with data observations and photographs of horses, wild Mustangs from the surrounding area. One report caught his eye. Subject 7 designation. Echo continues to show remarkable adaptive abilities. Cognitive function tests exceed expectations. Territorial memory remains intact. Recommend advancing to Phase 2 trials. Mason's stomach turned. What did they do to you? He asked, looking at Ghost. The Mustang nickered softly, backing away from the lab entrance. Mason replaced the file and followed, relieved to leave the disturbing room behind. In the main chamber, Mason noticed another door he'd missed earlier, marked Communications. Inside was radio equipment long dead and stacks of transmission logs. Mason flipped through them quickly until a name jumped out at him. Senator Richards. The log documented multiple calls between the facility and the senator's office in the weeks before Alex's disappearance. The last entry, dated June 17, 1971, read 0300 hours. A. Foster attempted unauthorized transmission to Washington Post. Transmission intercepted. Containment protocols enacted. June 18th was the day Alex had vanished. Mason sank to his knees, the weight of realization crashing down on him. They silenced you, he whispered. You weren't a deserter. You were trying to expose them. Ghost approached gently, nudging Mason's shoulder. The contact broke something loose inside him, and Mason found himself weeping for the first time since receiving news of Eleanor's death for the brother whose honor had been tarnished for the truth that had remained buried for 40 years. When the tears finally subsided, Mason looked up at Ghost with newfound understanding. You brought me here for a reason, he said. You wanted me to know what happened to him. The horse blinked, those amber eyes somehow both wild and profoundly intelligent. Mason gathered Alex's journal, the personnel file, and several of the most damning reports about the testing. Whatever had happened here, whatever his brother had discovered, deserved to be brought to light. We can't do this alone, Mason said to Ghost. We need help. The sky was beginning to lighten when they emerged from the facility. Mason carefully sealed the entrance behind them, making it appear undisturbed. The journey back to the ranch seemed shorter, his mind racing with questions and plans. By mid-morning, they had returned to the ranch. Mason immediately called Lily Chen. I need to show you something, he said when she answered. It's about Echo Canyon and Ghost. There was a pause on the line. I'll be there in an hour, she said finally. And Mason, be careful who you talk to about this. As he waited for Lily, Mason sat on the porch steps, watching as Ghost grazed peacefully in the overgrown pasture, never straying far from the house. The morning sun caught the silver in the Mustang's coat, making it shimmer like something otherworldly. What are you? Mason asked softly. And how are you connected to all of this? Ghost lifted his head, meeting Mason's gaze with those knowing eyes that seemed to hold answers to questions Mason had only just begun to ask. Lily arrived with the midday sun high overhead, her truck kicking up dust along the driveway. She stepped out wearing jeans and a field jacket, more casual than her veterinary attire from the previous day. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, studying Mason's face as she approached the porch. In a manner of speaking, he replied, gesturing to the documents spread across the weathered porch table. I found these at a facility in Echo Canyon. Ghost led me there this morning. Ah. Lily's eyes widened as she took in the array of files, reports, and the worn leather journal. May I? Mason nodded, watching as she carefully examined the materials. Her expression shifted from professional curiosity to something deeper concern, then outrage, then a kind of grim validation. I knew it, she said, finally looking up at Mason. The rumors were true. What rumors? About Echo Canyon being a black site for experimental biology programs. She tapped a finger on one of the reports. This is extraordinary documentation of environmental violations and unauthorized testing protocols. They were experimenting on horses. Mason said the words, still difficult to speak aloud, including one named Echo that looks identical to Ghost. Lily glanced across the yard to where Ghost stood watching them, his posture alert but calm. The markings are the same, she confirmed. But as I said yesterday, Ghost can't be the same horse. Mustangs rarely live beyond 30 years, and these records are from 50 years ago. Then what's the connection? Why would Ghost lead me to that facility? How would he even know about it? Lily sat down, considering the questions. Mustangs have incredible spatial memory. They pass down migration routes, water sources, safe places through generations. It's how herds survive in harsh environments. Sure. So you think Ghost could be Echo's descendant and somehow remembered the location? It's possible, she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by this explanation either. Unusual, but possible. Ghost approached the fence line, nickering softly as if aware they were discussing him. Mason noticed the horse's limp had improved somewhat after Lily's treatment. "How's his leg?" she asked, following Mason's gaze. "Better. The antibiotics seem to be helping." Lily nodded, then returned her attention to the documents. "These reports about water contamination, they match stories I've heard from the Blackfoot Reservation. There was a spike in unusual illnesses there in the early 1970s. Cancer rates, birth defects. My sister's journal mentioned that," Mason said. "She was investigating a connection to Alex's disappearance. The official explanation was poor healthcare access, but the tribal elders never believed it." Lily looked up at Mason. "You should talk to Hannah Blackfeather at the Redwood Junction Historical Society. If anyone has records about what happened back then, it's her, and she has connections on the reservation. Will she help? Tell her I sent you and tell her it's about the water contamination. She lost family during that time." Mason nodded, gathering the documents into Eleanor's satchel. "I'll go this afternoon." Lily stood, her expression serious. "Mason, be careful. What you found implicates powerful people. Senator Warren Richards built his career on his military service and patriotism. If he was involved in covering this up—" "I know," Mason said quietly, "but my brother died trying to expose this. I won't let that be for nothing." As they walked toward Lily's truck, Ghost moved closer to the house, his amber eyes tracking their movement. "I can bring more medication for his leg tomorrow," Lily offered. "The old injury won't heal completely, but we can make him more comfortable." "I'd appreciate that," Mason said. She paused before getting into her truck. "Mason, be careful who you trust with this. Redwood Junction might seem like a sleepy town, but it's built on secrets." "That's the second warning I've received in 24 hours. Maybe you should listen," she said, but there was a glint of determination in her eyes that suggested she wasn't advising him to drop the matter. After Lily left, Mason sat on the porch steps, watching as Ghost grazed peacefully in the fading light. Subject 7. What had they done to the Mustangs in that facility, and was it possible this horse knew exactly what it was doing when it led Mason to the cave? He retrieved Alex's letter from his pocket, the one he'd found in the metal box outside the facility. He'd been almost afraid to open it, but now he carefully broke the seal, unfolding the brittle paper inside. "Mason." It began, and just seeing his name in his brother's handwriting after all these years brought a lump to his throat. "If you're reading this, something's happened to me. I've discovered things at Echo Canyon that people will kill to keep secret." The letter continued, detailing the weapons tests using radioactive materials without proper containment, the contamination reaching the Blackfoot's water supply, and the experiments on the Mustangs using them as living radiation detectors. But something unexpected happened with Echo, Alex had written. He started showing intelligence beyond anything they anticipated. "The scientists can't explain it, but I've seen it firsthand." Mason paused, glancing up at Ghost, who had moved closer to the porch. "I've gathered evidence and I'm going to get it out. But if I don't make it find Echo, he knows where everything is hidden. Sounds crazy, I know, but trust me on this." The letter ended with a simple apology. "I'm sorry for all the things I never said, for leaving the way I did. I hope someday you'll understand. I was trying to do the right thing. Your brother, Alex." Mason folded the letter with trembling hands. So Alex had suspected he might not survive his whistleblowing attempt, and he trusted Echo with the location of his evidence. Looking up, Mason found Ghost watching him from across the yard, those intelligent amber eyes seemingly able to see right through him. "He said you knew," Mason said quietly. "Echo knew where everything was hidden." Ghost nickered softly, approaching to stand near the porch steps. "But you can't be Echo. That's impossible." Ghost merely blinked, offering no explanation for the mystery of his existence or his knowledge. The Redwood Junction Historical Society occupied a modest brick building on Main Street, its weathered facade a testament to decades of service to the small community. Mason parked his truck a block away, out of caution, the satchel of documents tucked securely under his arm. Inside, the library was quiet, with only a few patrons browsing the shelves. The elderly librarian at the front desk glanced up as Mason entered. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for Hannah Blackfeather." "We have an appointment." The librarian nodded knowingly. "Archives are in the basement. Take the stairs at the back. She's expecting you." Mason thanked her and made his way past rows of books, feeling oddly exposed in the silent space. The stairs creaked under his weight as he descended to the basement level. A heavy door marked Archives Authorized Personnel Only awaited him at the bottom. He knocked twice, and almost immediately the door opened to reveal a woman in her early 50s with deep brown eyes and silver-streaked black hair pulled into a tight bun. Her expression was weary but determined. "Mr. Foster," she asked, her voice matching the authoritative tone from their phone conversation. "Yes," Mason replied. "Hannah Blackfeather." She nodded once, opening the door wider to admit him. "Come in quickly." The archives room was larger than Mason expected, with rows of metal shelving units holding boxes of documents, old newspapers, and leather-bound ledgers. A table in the center was cleared of everything except a tape recorder and a stack of folders. Hannah closed and locked the door behind them. "Did anyone follow you?" "I don't think so," Mason replied. "I took precautions." She studied him intently. "Lily says you found evidence about Project Echo." "I did," Mason said, placing Eleanor's satchel on the table. "But before I share it, I need to know who you are and why you care." A hint of approval flickered in Hannah's eyes. "Smart. Trust should be earned." She gestured to the chairs at the table. "Sit, please." As they settled across from each other, Hannah's professional demeanor softened slightly. "I'm the town historian officially. Unofficially, I've spent 20 years documenting the health crisis that struck the Blackfoot Reservation in the early 1970s. Her voice hardened. "My younger sister died of a rare cancer when she was just 12. She wasn't the only one." "I'm sorry," Mason said quietly. "The government claimed it was coincidence. Poor health care, bad luck." Hannah's jaw tightened. "We knew better. The water tasted wrong. Animals behaved strangely. But we had no proof." Mason nodded slowly. "My brother was trying to get that proof out." "Your brother," Hannah leaned forward. "Who was he?" "Lieutenant Alex Foster. He was stationed at the Echo Canyon facility in 1971, before he supposedly deserted." Recognition dawned in Hannah's eyes. "There were rumors about a soldier who tried to warn people, a name mentioned in whispers." She paused. "You believe he was silenced?" It wasn't a question. Mason nodded, opening Martha's satchel and removing the folder of photocopied documents. "He kept a journal," Mason explained, sliding several pages toward her. "Documented the contamination, the cover-up, everything. He was planning to expose it all when he disappeared." Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she examined the pages. "My God," she whispered. "After all this time." Mason watched her read emotions playing across her face: shock, vindication, grief. Finally, she looked up. "Your brother was a brave man, Mr. Foster." "Mason, please." "Mason." She tapped the documents. "This proves what we've always known. They poisoned our water, then buried the evidence along with our dead." Her voice cracked slightly. "Do you have the originals?" "Safe," Mason assured her. "These are copies." She nodded in approval. "Keep them that way. There are people in this town, powerful people, who will do anything to keep this buried." "Senator Richards," Mason said. "Among others," Hannah confirmed. "He was just a rising politician, then attached to the military project. Now he's untouchable." She hesitated. "Lily mentioned something else. A Mustang." Mason explained about Ghost, the facility discovery, and the mysterious connection to Echo, the horse his brother had known decades ago. "The tribal elders talk about spirit animals, guides between worlds," Hannah said thoughtfully. "I'm not particularly traditional myself, but sometimes I wonder." She shook her head. "However you found this information, it's a gift one my people have waited for." "What do you plan to do with it?" Mason asked. Hannah straightened her spine. "With your permission, I want to take this evidence to the tribal council. From there, we can approach federal authorities, the EPA, possibly the Justice Department." "That could take years," Mason said. "Justice often does, but we have to start somewhere." She studied him. "What do you want from this, Mason?" The question caught him off guard. "I want my brother's name cleared. I want people to know he didn't desert." "And Senator Richards?" Mason considered this. "I want the truth to come out, whatever that means for him." Hannah nodded, satisfied with his answer. "I can help with both, but first there's someone else you should meet. Someone who might remember your brother." "Kinwananun." "Chief Joseph Blackfeather. He was younger then, working as a tribal liaison with the military. If anyone on the reservation had contact with soldiers at Echo Canyon, it would have been him. Mason felt a surge of hope. Is he still alive? Very much so, and his memory is sharp. Hannah gathered the documents carefully. Can I keep these copies? I promise they'll be secure. Mason hesitated, then nodded. I'll need time to arrange a meeting with the chief. Understood. I'll set it up for tomorrow if that works for you. It does. Hannah wrote down an address on the reservation along with a time. Come alone and be discreet. She paused. One more thing. How much has Sheriff Reyes learned about this? I mentioned Project Echo to him. He seemed cautious. Said his father worked security at Fort Garrison. Hannah's expression tightened. Reyes Sr. was military police, had a reputation for following orders without question. What about the sheriff himself? Greg Reyes walks a careful line in this town. He enforces the law without upsetting the established order. She gathered her things. I wouldn't share more with him until we know whose side he's on. They parted ways at the library door, Hannah exiting first to ensure the coast was clear. Mason waited 5 minutes before leaving, the weight of their conversation settling on his shoulders. He had allies, now tentative ones, but allies nonetheless. When Mason returned to the ranch, he found Lily's truck parked in the driveway and Ghost standing calmly while she examined his leg. The Mustang seemed more at ease with her, today barely shifting, as she applied a medicated salve to the old injury. How's he doing? Mason asked, approaching slowly. Better than expected, Lily replied. He's remarkably cooperative for a wild horse. Most would need sedation for this kind of treatment. Ghost snickered softly when he saw Mason, ears perking forward in recognition. I brought some pain medication for him. Lily continued, nodding toward a small paper bag on the fence post. Mix it with applesauce. He should take it willingly. Thank you. What do I owe you? She waved him off. Consider it a favor to Eleanor's memory. She paused. Did you meet with Hannah? Just came from there. She's arranging for me to speak with Chief Blackfeather tomorrow. Lily nodded approvingly. Good, he's a wise man. She hesitated. There's something else you should know. Sheriff Reyes came by my clinic this morning asking questions about you and Ghost. Mason tensed. What kind of questions? Whether you seem stable, if I noticed anything unusual about the horse. She patted Ghost's neck one final time before stepping back. I told him you seemed like a grieving brother looking for closure, and the horse appeared to be a normal Mustang with an old injury. Thank you. I'm still not sure where the sheriff stands in all this. Neither am I, but I do know he takes his morning coffee at Clara's Diner with Senator Richards' son Cameron. They're old friends. She gave Mason a meaningful look. Just something to consider. After Lily left, Mason spent the afternoon making additional copies of the documents and caring for the ranch. Ghost stayed close, grazing in the yard or resting in the shade of the old oak tree. For a wild horse, he seemed remarkably content to remain on the property. In the evening, Mason sat on the porch steps watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Ghost stood nearby, his amber eyes reflecting the fading light. What happens when this is all over? Mason asked the horse. Will you go back to the wild? Ghost flicked an ear toward Mason as if considering the question. I'm not even sure what I'm doing here, Mason continued. Never planned to stay in Redwood Junction. Never thought I'd be picking up where Alex left off. Ghost moved closer, gently nudging Mason's shoulder with his muzzle. Yeah, I know, Mason said with a slight smile. One step at a time. The sound of an approaching vehicle had both man and horse looking toward the road. A battered pickup truck Mason didn't recognize was coming up the driveway, kicking up dust in the evening light. Mason stood instinctively, moving to place himself between Ghost and the approaching vehicle. The Mustang, rather than bolting as might be expected, remained steadfast beside him. The truck stopped and a young man stepped out, mid-20s, with black hair, wearing jeans and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He approached cautiously, keeping his hands visible. Mr. Foster, he called. I'm Tyler Blackfeather. Hannah sent me. Mason relaxed slightly but remained wary. Your mother didn't mention sending anyone? There's been a change of plans. Tyler glanced at Ghost with undisguised interest. That's him, the Mustang that led you to the facility. Why did Hannah send you? Mason pressed, ignoring the question. Someone was asking about your meeting at the library, one of Senator Richards' people. Tyler looked directly at Mason. Mom thought it best to move up your meeting with Chief Blackfeather. He paused, then added, She also said to tell you that Echo knew where everything was hidden, said you'd understand it was really from her. The phrase from Alex's letter convinced Mason. When does the chief want to meet now? Tonight. Tyler nodded toward his truck. I can take you. Now. Mason hesitated. What about my truck? Better to leave it here. Less conspicuous. Tyler's gaze shifted to Ghost. Mom said the horse is important too. Can he follow us? He's wild. He does what he wants. Tyler nodded, accepting this. We should go soon. It's a 30-minute drive to the reservation. Mason went inside to retrieve the original documents from Eleanor's safe, securing them in the satchel. When he emerged, Tyler was standing near Ghost, not touching the horse, but speaking to it softly in a language Mason didn't understand. What are you saying to him? Mason asked. Old words. A greeting for a spirit guide. Tyler smiled faintly at Mason's expression. Don't worry, I don't actually believe the legends, but my grandfather might. Best to be respectful. They climbed into Tyler's truck, and as they pulled away, Mason looked back to see Ghost watching them go. To his amazement, the Mustang began to follow, keeping pace despite its limp. Well, I'll be damned, Tyler murmured, watching in the rearview mirror. Maybe there's something to those old stories after all. The journey to the Blackfoot Reservation took them along back roads away from the main highway. Tyler drove with the confident ease of someone who knew every curve and dip in the path. Hannah is your mother? Mason asked as they drove. Tyler nodded. She raised me alone after my father died. Mining accident when I was 3. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Tyler kept his eyes on the road. She's dedicated her life to uncovering what happened at Echo Canyon, what it did to our people. And you? I left for college, studied environmental science, came back when I realized the fight was still here. He glanced at Mason. Your brother tried to warn us. That means something to the tribe. They lapsed into silence as the truck wound its way deeper into reservation land. Occasionally, Mason checked the side mirror, half expecting to have lost sight of Ghost, but each time the Mustang was there, maintaining a steady pace behind them. Finally, they turned onto a narrow dirt road that led to a modest house set back among juniper trees. Light glowed warmly from the windows, and an older model car was parked outside. This is my grandfather's home, Tyler explained as they stopped. Chief Blackfeather to you. As they exited the truck, Mason looked back to see Ghost emerging from the shadows, having followed them the entire way. The Mustang approached slowly, coming to stand near Mason, as if waiting to be included in whatever came next. Tyler stared at the horse with newfound respect. 20 miles from your ranch, and he followed without hesitation, Tyler said. That's not normal Mustang behavior. Nothing about this situation is normal, Mason replied. The front door opened and an elderly man stepped onto the porch. Chief Joseph Blackfeather was tall and straight-backed despite his advanced years, with a deeply lined face and penetrating dark eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. He wore simple clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt with a turquoise necklace, his only adornment. His gaze moved from Mason to Ghost, and something like recognition flickered across his features. Alex Foster's brother, he said, his voice deep and measured. After all these years, and you've brought Echo's descendant with you. Mason felt a chill run down his spine. You remember my brother? Chief Blackfeather nodded slowly. I remember everything about those dark days. Come inside. We have much to discuss. As they approached the house, the chief's attention remained fixed on Ghost. The horse can stay in the corral behind the house. He will be safe there. To Mason's continued amazement, Ghost allowed Tyler to lead him around to the back of the property, following as docilely as any trained horse might. How did you know about Echo? Mason asked as they entered the house. Chief Blackfeather's expression was solemn. Because your brother brought him to me the night before he disappeared. He wanted me to protect the horse and the evidence it would lead to. The chief's home was modest but warm, with hand-woven rugs covering the wood floors and walls adorned with framed photographs in traditional artwork. He led Mason to a kitchen table where a pot of tea already waited. Sit, he said simply. Your journey has been long in coming. Mason settled into a chair, placing Eleanor's satchel on the table. You said my brother brought Echo to you. Chief Blackfeather nodded, his weathered hands cradling a teacup. June 17th, 1971. A night I have never forgotten. Alex arrived after midnight, agitated but determined. He had documents proving the military was conducting radiation tests that were contaminating our water, and he had Echo with him. "Why bring the horse to you?" Mason asked. "Because Echo was special." The chief's eyes met Mason's. The scientists at the base had been experimenting with the Mustangs, studying how they detected and avoided radiation in the wild. But Echo showed abilities beyond what they expected. "What kind of abilities?" "Intelligence, memory, sensitivity to things most couldn't perceive." Chief Blackfeather sipped his tea. "Your brother believed Echo could lead others to the evidence if something happened to him. He made me promise to protect the horse." Mason leaned forward. "But that was 50 years ago. Horses don't live that long." "No, they don't." The chief set down his cup. "I kept Echo safe as promised. He lived here for many years, becoming part of my family's herd. He sired several foals before passing in the early 1990s. Then Ghost is what his grandson, great-grandson, by bloodline, yes." Chief Blackfeather's expression grew thoughtful. "But there is more to inheritance than blood alone. Our people believe knowledge can pass through generations in ways science cannot fully explain. Territory, danger, safe places, these things are remembered." Mason considered this. "The markings are identical." "Yes, that sometimes happens with strong bloodlines." The chief paused as the door opened and Tyler entered. "Did the horse settle in?" "Like he's been here before," Tyler replied, taking a seat at the table. "Went straight to the water trough, then to the exact spot where we used to keep the old horses." Chief Blackfeather nodded as if this confirmed something. "Tyler, show Mr. Foster the photograph." "Anirishurm." Tyler retrieved a worn photo album from a bookshelf and carefully removed a faded color photograph. He handed it to Mason. The image showed a much younger Chief Blackfeather standing beside a Mustang that was unmistakably identical to Ghost, down to the distinctive markings on its flank. A third figure stood partially cropped from the frame, just a uniformed arm and shoulder visible. "Alex," Mason whispered, recognizing his brother's military sleeve. "Your brother gave me this picture along with copies of his evidence. He said if he didn't return in 3 days, I should take everything to the authorities." The chief's voice grew heavy. But the next morning, military police came to the reservation, claiming a soldier had deserted with classified documents. They searched everywhere, questioned everyone. I hid Echo in the papers, but I knew then that Alex had been discovered. "Did you go to the authorities?" Mason asked. "I tried. The local sheriff, Rhea's father, turned me away. The state environmental office lost my paperwork. A reporter I contacted was suddenly reassigned." Chief Blackfeather shook his head. "The corruption ran deep. Eventually I realized the only way to protect my people was to document the effects ourselves, preserve what evidence we had, and wait for a time when the truth might finally be heard." "That time is now," Tyler said firmly. Chief Blackfeather nodded. "Perhaps." He looked at Mason. "With your brother's original documents in our health records from the last 50 years, we may finally have enough to force an investigation." He looked at Mason intently. "Are you prepared for what that means?" "Taking on Senator Richards will not be easy. He has built his career on his military service and patriotism." "My brother died trying to expose this," Mason said, determination hardening in his voice. "I won't let that be for nothing." The chief studied Mason's face. "You have his spirit. Alex was a good man caught in an impossible situation." He turned to Tyler. "Bring the box." Tyler disappeared into another room, returning with a wooden box inlaid with turquoise. Chief Blackfeather opened it carefully and removed a small leather pouch along with several yellowed envelopes. "Echo wore this around his neck when Alex brought him to me," the chief explained, opening the pouch to reveal a small metal key. "Your brother said it would open a lockbox hidden at the facility, something not even the military knew about, a backup of all his evidence." Mason stared at the key. "It might still be there." "After 50 years, Tyler sounded skeptical. "The facility was abandoned, not demolished," Mason pointed out. "If it was hidden well enough." Chief Blackfeather handed Mason the key. "Perhaps it is time to complete what your brother started." Tyler leaned forward. "We should go back to the facility. Look for this lockbox." "Not tonight," the chief cautioned. "Dawn would be safer. Fewer eyes watching." A sudden commotion outside drew their attention. The sound of a horse whinnying in distress. Tyler hurried to the window. "Grandfather, someone's at the corral," he said urgently. "2 men." Mason was on his feet, instantly moving to look outside. In the dim light provided by the quarter moon, he could make out two figures approaching the corral where Ghost was kept. One held what appeared to be a tranquilizer gun. "BLM doesn't operate at night," Tyler said, grabbing a jacket. "Those aren't government agents." The three men slipped out the back door, keeping to the shadows. As they drew closer, Mason could hear muted voices. "Just sedate it and get it loaded," one man was saying. "The senator wants this wrapped up quietly." Mason felt a surge of anger. Without thinking, he stepped forward into the moonlight. "That's my horse you're trying to steal." The men spun around, startled. One raised the tranquilizer gun, pointing it directly at Mason. "This doesn't concern you, Foster." Mason recognized him now. Cameron Richards, the senator's son and chief of staff. Mason had seen his photo in news articles. "Cameron Richards," Mason said evenly. "Does your father send you to do all his dirty work, or just the illegal parts?" Cameron's companion, a burly man Mason didn't recognize, shifted nervously. "We should go, Cameron. Too many witnesses." "We have orders," Cameron replied tersely. "The horse is government property." "Government property," Mason repeated. "A wild Mustang." "Not wild. Part of a classified research program." Cameron kept the tranquilizer gun steady. "Your presence at Echo Canyon was trespassing on a restricted military site." Chief Blackfeather stepped forward, his dignified bearing undiminished by age. "This is reservation land, Mr. Richards. You have no authority here." "With all due respect, Chief, this goes beyond tribal jurisdiction. We're reclaiming federal property and securing a compromised installation." Tyler had been edging around the side of the corral while they talked. Now he lunged forward, knocking the tranquilizer gun from Cameron's hand. It fired harmlessly into the dirt. Chaos erupted. The burly man grabbed Tyler while Cameron scrambled for the fallen weapon. Mason charged forward, tackling Cameron to the ground. They struggled in the dirt, each fighting for control. "You don't understand what you're involving yourself in," Cameron hissed. "My father protected this community. The tests brought jobs funding. They brought cancer and death." Mason shot back, pinning Cameron's arms. "Your father covered up poisoning innocent people." Inside the corral, Ghost reared up, front hooves pawing the air. The horse let out a shrill whinny that echoed across the property. The sound was so commanding that everyone froze momentarily. In that moment of distraction, Cameron broke free of Mason's grip and grabbed the tranquilizer gun. He aimed it at Ghost, finger tightening on the trigger. "No!" Mason shouted, lunging forward. A single shot rang out, but it wasn't from the tranquilizer. Cameron cried out in pain, dropping the weapon and clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. "That's enough," a firm voice commanded. Sheriff Greg Reyes stepped from the shadows, his service weapon still raised. "That's enough." Behind him, Deputy Rodriguez moved to restrain Cameron's companion, who offered no resistance. "Sheriff," Cameron gasped, "this is a federal matter. You have no jurisdiction." "Funny, I was about to say the same to you," Reyes replied. "Last I checked, trespassing on reservation land, attempted theft, and assault aren't federal privileges." He looked at Chief Blackfeather. "My apologies for the disturbance, Chief. The rest of you all right?" Mason nodded, brushing dirt from his clothes. "How did you know to come here?" "Dr. Chen saw Tyler's truck leaving your place in a hurry. Given the questions I've been asking, she was concerned." The sheriff's weathered face revealed nothing. "She called me directly, not through dispatch." Mason eyed him cautiously. "Whose side are you on, Sheriff?" Reyes sighed, suddenly looking tired. "The side of the law, which is more complicated than most people realize." He glanced at Cameron, who Rodriguez was now helping to his feet. "I've had suspicions about Echo Canyon for years. My father worked security there. Came home with nightmares he wouldn't talk about." "You knew?" Chief Blackfeather asked. "Suspected. Never had proof." Reyes' gaze shifted to Ghost, who had calmed and now stood watching them intently from the corral. "When Foster here started asking questions about Project Echo, I did some digging of my own, found records my father had kept, violations he documented, but had been ordered to ignore." "Why didn't you say something before?" Mason demanded. "Because accusations without evidence would have gone nowhere, especially against someone like Senator Richards." The sheriff looked at Mason. "I needed to know if you actually had something solid or were just chasing ghosts." Deputy Rodriguez approached, having secured Cameron in the patrol car. "His friend's talking already, Sheriff. Says the senator ordered them to capture the horse and destroy any evidence connecting it to Echo Canyon. Reyes nodded grimly. Not surprised. Whatever you found, it's got them scared. He handed Mason a business card. My personal number. Call me when you're ready to go public with what you have. I'll help any way I can. Mason accepted the card, still not entirely convinced. Why should I trust you? Because I grew up in Redwood Junction, watching families on the reservation suffer while officials looked the other way. Rhea's voice hardened. My father was part of that system. I became sheriff to be better than he was. Chief Blackfeather placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. Greg Reyes has been one of the few town officials who treated our people fairly. If he offers help, I believe we should accept it. Mason nodded slowly. All right, but we move carefully from here. First priority is keeping you and that horse safe, Reyes said, glancing at the patrol car, where Cameron sat fuming. Richards won't take this setback lightly. He's got resources and connections we can't match. As the sheriff and his deputy prepared to leave with their prisoners, Mason approached Reyes one last time. There might be more evidence still at the facility. A lockbox my brother hid. Reyes considered this. After you find it, bring it to me. We'll need to document the chain of custody if this ever goes to court. He lowered his voice. And Foster, watch your back. This just got a lot more dangerous. After the patrol cars pulled away, Mason, Tyler, and Chief Blackfeather returned to the house. The adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off, leaving Mason drained but resolute. You should stay here tonight, Chief Blackfeather suggested. Both you and the horse will be safer on reservation land. Mason nodded gratefully. At first light, he would return to Echo Canyon with Tyler, seeking the final piece of evidence his brother had hidden away. But now there was a new urgency to their mission. They needed to find the lockbox before Richards could send someone else to destroy it. Outside, under the cold light of the stars, Ghost stood at the edge of the corral, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains where Echo Canyon waited with its remaining secrets. The Mustang's presence was a constant reminder that some connections transcended normal understanding bonds that stretched across decades, guiding Mason toward a truth his brother had died trying to reveal. Mason placed a hand on the corral fence, watching the silver horse in the moonlight. We're going to finish what Alex started, he said softly. Tomorrow. Ghost nickered gently in response, as if understanding perfectly what lay ahead. Dawn broke over the Blackfoot Reservation in a wash of pale gold light. Mason stood by the corral watching as Tyler secured saddles on two horses, a sturdy paint gelding for himself, and a docile bay mare for Mason. Fastest way to Echo Canyon is on horseback, Tyler explained, tightening a cinch. The old trails aren't accessible by vehicle. Ghost moved restlessly around the corral, watching the preparations with evident interest. What about him? Mason asked, nodding toward the Mustang. He'll follow, Tyler said with certainty. He's proven that already. Chief Blackfeather emerged from the house carrying a small leather bag. Food and water, he said, handing it to Mason. The journey takes 3 hours by the eastern path. Mason secured the provisions to his saddle, along with Eleanor's satchel containing the documents and Alex's revolver. The weight of responsibility pressed on him as he mounted the bay mare, adjusting to the feel of a horse beneath him, something he hadn't experienced since childhood lessons on this very ranch. Tyler opened the corral gate, allowing Ghost to step out. The Mustang shook his mane, seeming almost eager to begin. Without prompting, he positioned himself alongside Mason's mount. Remember, Chief Blackfeather said as they prepared to depart, the military may have abandoned the facility, but that doesn't mean it isn't watched, especially now that they know you've discovered it. Tyler nodded grimly. We'll be careful, grandfather. As they rode away from the property, Mason glanced back to see the elderly chief watching them, his face etched with the memory of a half-century silent vigil for justice. The weight of that responsibility settled on Mason's shoulders, not just clearing his brother's name, but bringing closure to an entire community. The trail Tyler chose wound through juniper forests and across rocky plateaus, avoiding the main roads where they might be spotted. Ghost kept pace effortlessly despite his injured legs, sometimes moving ahead as if guiding them. The landscape grew increasingly rugged as they approached Echo Canyon, its stone formations rising like ancient sentinels against the morning sky. Your brother must have been something special, Tyler said during a brief rest. Not many soldiers would risk everything to protect people they didn't even know. Mason nodded, taking a swig from his canteen. Alex always had a strong sense of right and wrong, even as kids. He stared at the distant mountains. I joined the military because he did, followed his footsteps without really understanding why. And then he was gone, branded a deserter and forgotten. Except by my grandfather, Tyler reminded him. An echo. Ghost stood nearby, ears swiveling attentively toward their conversation. My grandfather says some bonds transcend our understanding, Tyler said, watching the Mustang. Not mystical necessarily, just deeper than we give nature credit for. Chiu. They continued on the sun, climbing higher as they navigated increasingly difficult terrain. Tyler led them through a narrow canyon that opened suddenly onto a ridge overlooking a familiar outcropping of rock. There it is, Mason said, recognizing the camouflaged entrance to the facility. Looks undisturbed. Don't be too sure, Tyler cautioned. Let's approach carefully. They dismounted, securing their horses in a sheltered alcove. Ghost, however, moved ahead, picking his way down the slope toward the hidden door. He's done this before, Mason murmured, following the Mustang. Lead on. The entrance appeared just as Mason had left it, partially obscured by vegetation and natural rock formations. But as they drew closer, subtle differences became apparent. Faint boot prints in the dust, a branch moved slightly from its position. Someone's been here, Tyler whispered, crouching to examine the ground. Recently, Mason reached for Alex's revolver, keeping it ready as they approached the metal door. It stood ajar exactly as he'd left it nights before. Beyond lay darkness and uncertainty. Ghost stopped at the threshold, pawing the ground impatiently, but refusing to enter. I think he's saying hurry, Tyler suggested. Mason nodded, retrieving a flashlight from his saddlebag. Stay alert. Whoever was here might still be inside. Dear Rana. They slipped through the doorway, Mason leading with the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The main chamber appeared undisturbed, the dust-covered tables and equipment just as Mason remembered. But subtle signs of intrusion were evident, a file cabinet drawer not fully closed, papers disturbed from their decades-long rest. They were looking for something, Mason whispered, but I don't think they found it. The lockbox your brother hid, Tyler concluded. How do we find it if they couldn't? Mason held up the small key Chief Blackfeather had given him. We have this, and we have something they don't. He moved back to the entrance where Ghost waited. We have him. Ghost's ears perked forward as Mason approached. You brought me here for a reason, Mason said softly. Your ancestor knew where Steve hid everything. Ghost blinked, those amber eyes eerily intelligent in the beam of the flashlight. I'm going to try something, Mason told Tyler. He held the key out to Ghost, palm flat. Show us, boy. Where does this go? For a long moment, Ghost merely stared at the key. Then with deliberate movement, the horse turned and limped along the perimeter of the facility entrance. He stopped at a point where the natural rock formation met the man-made wall, pawing insistently at a section of stone that appeared no different from the rest. Mason exchanged glances with Tyler, then approached, running his hands over the rock face. It felt solid, immovable. But as he applied pressure to different sections, a small portion shifted slightly under his touch. There's something here, Mason murmured, his fingers finding a nearly invisible seam in the stone. Tyler joined him, and together they pressed and probed until a section of the rock face swung inward, revealing a small cavity carved into the mountain itself. Inside was a metal box, roughly the size of a thick book covered in decades of dust. Mason's hands trembled slightly as he inserted the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, and the lid lifted to reveal a treasure trove. Photographs, documents, soil and water samples carefully sealed in glass vials, and a reel-to-reel tape labeled Project Echo Test Site Recordings. He documented everything, Mason whispered, emotion thick in his throat. Every detail they tried to bury. Among the papers was a sealed envelope addressed simply Mason. With unsteady fingers, he broke the seal, unfolding a letter written in his brother's neat handwriting. Mason, it began. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I discovered something at Echo Canyon that I couldn't ignore: radiation testing without proper containment, contaminating land that's been home to the Blackfoot tribe for generations. They're covering it up, claiming the land was uninhabited testing ground. Senator Richards knows the truth, but is bearing reports to protect his political future. Mason paused, his voice catching. Tyler remained respectfully silent as he continued reading. I've gathered evidence, recorded conversations, collected samples. By the time you find this, I'll have either succeeded in exposing it all or been silenced. Either way, I need you to know I didn't desert. I couldn't stand by while innocent people were poisoned for military convenience. Echo has been my unexpected ally in this, smarter than any horse has a right to be. The experiments they conducted enhanced something already present in these Mustangs, an intelligence, an awareness the scientists never anticipated. Trust him. He'll lead you where you need to go. I'm sorry for leaving you with this burden, but I know you, little brother. You'll do what's right even when it's difficult. You always have. With love and faith, Alex. Mason folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his shirt pocket close to his heart. The evidence before them was irrefutable proof of environmental crimes, documented illness patterns, and a deliberate cover-up reaching to the highest levels of state government. We need to get this to Sheriff Reyes, Mason said finally. Tonight. Tyler nodded, helping to carefully repack the box. This changes everything. The tribe can finally demand accountability, maybe even reparations for the health impacts. A sound from outside, the shifting of loose rock, froze them both. Mason doused the flashlight, plunging them into darkness, and they listened intently. Another sound followed, the unmistakable nicker of Ghost warning them. Someone's here, Tyler whispered. Mason clutched the metal box to his chest, his other hand gripping Alex's revolver. They moved silently to the entrance, peering cautiously outside. 3 men in dark clothing were approaching the facility, armed with rifles. At the edge of the clearing, Ghost stood with ears pinned back, watching the intruders. Senator Richards isn't wasting any time, Tyler murmured. Cameron must have contacted him from jail. Mason surveyed their options, which were limited. They were trapped in the facility with only one exit, and the men outside were clearly prepared for confrontation. We need a distraction, Mason whispered. As if in answer, Ghost suddenly charged forward, racing directly at the approaching men. They shouted in alarm, one raising his rifle toward the horse. No! Mason yelled, forgetting concealment in his panic for Ghost's safety. The moment of confusion was enough. Ghost veered away before reaching the men, leading them on a chase away from the facility entrance. The Mustang was impossibly quick, despite his injured legs staying just ahead of his pursuers, drawing them further from Mason and Tyler. He's creating an opening, Tyler realized. We need to move now. Clutching the precious box, they slipped out of the facility and ran in the opposite direction, using the rock formations for cover. They could hear the men shouting behind them, still focused on capturing the elusive Mustang. They reached their horses quickly, mounting and urging them into a gallop along a different trail than the one they'd arrived on. Mason looked back desperately for any sign of Ghost, but the Mustang had disappeared along with his pursuers. He'll find us, Tyler assured him, seeing Mason's concern. He always has. They rode hard for nearly an hour, following game trails and dry creek beds to mask their path. Finally, when the horses needed rest, they stopped in a sheltered canyon, dismounting to check the precious cargo. Everything's intact, Mason confirmed, examining the box's contents. Alex gathered enough evidence to take down Richards and everyone else involved in the cover-up. Tyler nodded, but his expression remained troubled. The Mustang saved us back there, risked himself. Sure, Mason felt the same worry gnawing at him. If anything happened to Ghost, Grandfather would say he chose his path, Tyler said quietly, just as your brother did. As the afternoon waned, they decided to push on toward the reservation, taking an even more circuitous route to avoid detection. The metal box was secured in Mason's saddlebag, its contents potentially enough to rewrite history and bring long-delayed justice to the Blackfoot people. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when they heard hoofbeats approaching. Mason reached for Alex's revolver, but Tyler held up a hand, listening intently. That's not multiple horses, he said. It's just one. A moment later, Ghost appeared around a bend in the trail, dusty and breathing hard, but seemingly unharmed. The Mustang approached calmly, as if their reunion had never been in doubt. Mason dismounted, moving to check the horse for injuries. You crazy animal, he murmured, relief evident in his voice. What were you thinking? Ghost leaned into Mason's touch, exhaustion evident in his stance. Whatever chase had ensued, it had pushed the Mustang's limits. We need to get back to the reservation, Tyler urged. It's not safe to stay in the open. Mason nodded, giving Ghost's neck a final pat before remounting. The Mustang fell in beside them as they continued their journey, maintaining a steady pace despite obvious fatigue. Dusk was settling over the landscape when they finally reached the boundaries of the Blackfoot Reservation. Tyler led them along back trails to avoid the main road, eventually bringing them to a small cabin deeper in the reservation than Chief Blackfeather's home. "My place," he explained as they dismounted. "We'll be safer here tonight. No one would expect us to come this far into tribal land." Inside the cabin was sparsely furnished, but comfortable. Tyler secured the horses in a small corral behind the structure, giving special attention to Ghost's injured leg, which showed signs of additional strain from the day's exertions. Using the satellite phone that had once belonged to Eleanor Mason, called Sheriff Reyes, keeping the conversation brief and coded, the sheriff agreed to meet them at the cabin in 2 hours alone. "We'll need to document everything properly," Mason told Tyler as they settled in to wait. "Chain of custody witness statements, the works." Tyler nodded, his expression somber. "This won't be an easy fight. Senator Richards has deep connections in state government." "We have the truth," Mason said simply, "and after 50 years it deserves to be heard." Outside, Ghost stood at the edge of the corral, his attention fixed on the distant horizon where Echo Canyon lay. The Mustang's vigil seemed to embody the decades-long wait for justice. Patient, unwavering, determined. In that moment, Mason felt closer to his brother than he had in 50 years, connected by a shared purpose that transcended time and loss. When Sheriff Reyes finally arrived, his face grave with the weight of what was to come, Mason was ready. He placed Alex's box on the table, along with the original journal and letters, creating a comprehensive record of crimes hidden beneath bureaucratic silence for half a century. "Once this goes public, there's no turning back," Reyes warned, carefully examining the evidence. "Are you prepared for what comes next?" Mason thought of Alex, of the sacrifice he'd made, trying to protect people he barely knew. He thought of Chief Blackfeather waiting decades for validation of what his people had suffered. He thought of Ghost, who had led him to the truth with an intelligence and purpose that defied simple explanation. "I'm ready," Mason said, his voice steady with conviction. It's time the truth came to light. 3 months passed each day, bringing new developments in what the newspapers had dubbed the Echo Canyon scandal. Mason sat on the porch of the Foster Ranch, no longer dilapidated, but slowly returning to life under his care, watching the evening news on a small television he'd set up outside. "Senator Warren Richards resigned today," the anchorwoman announced amid mounting evidence of his involvement in covering up radiation contamination on the Blackfoot Reservation in the 1970s. "The Senate Ethics Committee has recommended a full criminal investigation, while the Department of Justice has appointed a special prosecutor to review decades of environmental violations connected to Project Echo." Mason sipped his coffee, feeling neither triumph nor vindication, only a quiet sense that something long bent had finally been straightened. Beside him, Lily Chen sat in Eleanor's old rocking chair, her presence on the ranch becoming increasingly frequent over the past months. "They're saying the compensation package for the Blackfoot could reach hundreds of millions," she remarked, nodding toward the television. "Not that any amount can make up for what they suffered." "No," Mason agreed, "but acknowledgement matters. Recognition that they were wronged." Lily reached out her hand, coming to rest lightly on his. "Alex would be proud of what you've accomplished." The Pentagon had officially exonerated Lieutenant Alex Foster, posthumously acknowledging his actions as those of a whistleblower attempting to expose illegal testing. His remains had never been found, but a memorial service held at Arlington National Cemetery had provided closure. Mason hadn't realized he needed until he stood watching the honor guard fold a flag in his brother's memory. From the pasture came the sound of nickering horses, Eleanor's old gelding, now recovering his strength, and the 3 Mustang mares Mason had adopted from the BLM's wild horse program. A small herd, the beginning of something new. Ghost stood apart as always at the edge of the property. The Mustang had never fully domesticated, refusing a stall or regular handling. Mason had built him a 3-sided shelter in the pasture, respecting his need for freedom while providing protection from the elements. "He's looking better," Lily observed, following Mason's gaze. "That new treatment protocol seems to be working." "Chief Blackfeather says he's where he chooses to be," Mason said. "That counts for something." The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Hannah Blackfeather's car appeared, followed by Tyler's pickup truck. The mother and son had become regular visitors to the ranch, part of the unofficial coalition that had formed around bringing the Echo Canyon evidence to light. Hannah stepped out a folder tucked under her arm. The tribal council approved the historical marker today, she announced as she approached the porch. It will be placed at the eastern edge of the reservation, acknowledging the contamination and honoring those who tried to expose it. Alex's name, Mason asked. Prominently featured, Hannah confirmed. Along with my sisters and the others we lost. Her expression softened. How are you doing? With all this attention, the media won't leave it alone? Mason shrugged. Sheriff Reyes runs interference when it gets too intense. I'm just glad the story's being told properly now. Tyler joined them carrying a small box. Grandfather sent these for Ghost. He explains, showing Mason a collection of traditional herbs. He says to mix it with honey. Mason accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity. Chief Blackfeather, though still skeptical of modern medicine, had acknowledged Lily's treatments were helping Ghost. This offering of traditional remedies was his way of contributing to the horse's care. The Department of Interior called again, Hannah said, taking a seat on the porch steps. They want to include Ghost in their wild horse protection program as a special case study. Apparently, his DNA shows some unique markers they're interested in preserving. I told them he's not a research subject, Mason replied firmly. He's been through enough of that. They agreed to non-invasive observation only, Lily noted. It could help protect other Mustangs with similar lineage. The discovery that Echo and his descendants had been part of radiation sensitivity experiments had sparked renewed interest in Mustang preservation, especially those herds with potential exposure to test sites across the American West. Mason had insisted on strict ethical guidelines before allowing any participation. There's something else, Tyler said, his expression serious. The EPA finished testing this spring on the eastern boundary of your property. It shows trace contamination consistent with the Echo Canyon samples. Mason wasn't surprised. The ranch's proximity to the testing site had always suggested possible exposure. Is it dangerous? Low levels. They don't recommend using it for drinking water, but it doesn't pose an immediate health risk. Tyler paused. It explains why Eleanor got sick, though. The revelation that his sister's cancer might have been connected to the same contamination that had affected the reservation was something Mason was still processing. Eleanor had never mentioned her illness in their infrequent communications, choosing to face it alone rather than disrupt his life. They've added the ranch to the cleanup program, Hannah added. No cost to you. The settlement with the Department of Defense covers private properties affected by the contamination. As the evening deepened, they gathered around a small fire pit Mason had built in the yard. Sheriff Reyes joined them later, bringing news that the county commissioners had unanimously approved renaming the road leading to Echo Canyon as Lieutenant Alex Foster Memorial Highway. A small gesture, but meaningful. Their conversations drifted between the practical matters of ongoing investigations and more personal reflections on how the revelations had changed their community. Redwood Junction was grappling with its complicity in decades of silence, while the Blackfoot Reservation was navigating newfound validation and resources. Throughout it all, Ghost maintained his vigil at the property's edge, occasionally approaching to accept an apple or gentle touch, but never fully integrating into the domestic routines of the ranch. The Mustang remained a bridge between worlds, wild yet connected, independent yet present. As their guests departed for the evening, Lily lingered, helping Mason extinguish the fire. Their relationship had evolved gradually from professional respect to something deeper, built on shared purpose and quiet understanding. Neither felt the need to rush or define it beyond the comfort of each other's company. Stay for breakfast, Mason asked as they walked toward the house. She smiled. I'd like that. In the pale moonlight, Mason caught sight of Ghost, moving along the fence line, head raised as he scented the night air. For a moment, the Mustang paused, looking directly at Mason, with those intelligent amber eyes that had first drawn him into this journey of discovery. Do you ever wonder, Lily asked softly, following his gaze, if he understands what he helped accomplish? Mason considered this. I think he knows things change because of him. Whether he understands the details, he shrugged. Does it matter? I suppose not, she admitted. The result is the same. Later that night, unable to sleep, Mason stood at his bedroom window, looking out over the ranch. The moon cast silver light across the fields, illuminating Ghost's pale form as the Mustang gazed toward Echo Canyon. The sight had become familiar, the horse's nightly contemplation of distant mountains that held memories science couldn't quite explain. Mason thought of Alex's words from the letter, "Trust him. He'll lead you where you need to go." His brother had recognized something special in Echo, a connection that had somehow persisted through generations, leading eventually to Mason and the long-delayed justice that followed. Morning brought a surprise visitor. Chief Blackfeather arrived alone, moving deliberately with the aid of a carved walking stick. Mason welcomed him into the kitchen where Lily was preparing breakfast. "I had a dream," the chief said without preamble, declining coffee but accepting a seat at the table. "About your brother and the Mustang." Mason had come to respect the elderly man's intuition, neither dismissing nor overinterpreting his insights. "What kind of dream?" "A completion," Chief Blackfeather replied. "A circle closing." He looked out the window to where Ghost grazed in the morning light. "The horse has finished what it came to do." Mason followed his gaze. "What do you mean?" "Some purposes are temporary. Guides who appear when needed, then continue their own journey." The chief's weathered hands rested calmly on the table. "Don't be surprised if he leaves soon." "Awichu." Lily joined them, sensing the seriousness of the conversation. "Is something wrong with Ghost?" "No," Chief Blackfeather assured her. "But wild things must follow their nature. His task is complete." After breakfast, Mason walked the chief out to his car. Before leaving, the elderly man pressed something into Mason's hand, a small carved wooden horse, its lines simple but capturing the essence of a Mustang in motion. "A reminder," he said, "of connections that cannot be explained but should be honored." Mason thanked him, understanding the gift represented more than just a token of friendship. It was acknowledgement of something profound they had shared, something that transcended ordinary experience without requiring supernatural explanation. That evening, Mason and Lily sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and purple. Ghost stood at the far end of the pasture facing Echo Canyon, more restless than usual. "Do you think Chief Blackfeather is right?" Lily asked. "That he might leave?" Mason nodded slowly. "I've always known he wasn't really mine to keep." The Mustang had accomplished what even Alex couldn't, bringing to light long-buried evidence connecting Mason to the people who could help deliver justice, and in the process, healing wounds that had festered for decades. If his purpose was complete, perhaps his wild nature would call him back to the open ranges where he belonged. "Will you be okay if he goes?" Lily asked softly. Mason considered this. "I think so. He gave me back my brother in a way. Gave me purpose when I had none." He reached for her hand. "And he led me here to this place, to these people." The next morning, Ghost was gone. The fence was intact, the gate closed. He had jumped it somehow, despite his injured leg. Mason stood at the property line, scanning the distant hills for any sign of the Mustang, but knowing already he wouldn't find him. Lily joined him, slipping her arm through his. "Do you want to go looking for him?" Mason shook his head. "No, he chose to leave. I need to respect that." Over the following weeks, occasional reports filtered in of a lone Mustang matching Ghost's description, seen running with a wild herd in the highlands beyond Echo Canyon. BLM rangers confirmed the sighting, noting the horse's distinctive markings, and the unusual fact that the bachelor stallion had been accepted into an established herd despite his age and injury, something rarely seen in wild horse dynamics. Mason listened to these stories with quiet satisfaction, imagining Ghost running free in the same ranges where his ancestors had roamed. The Mustang had come into his life when needed, led him to truth and redemption, then returned to the wilderness that was his true home. 6 months after Ghost's departure, Mason stood with Lily Hannah, Tyler Sheriff Reyes, and Chief Blackfeather at the newly erected memorial on the Blackfoot Reservation. The stone marker honored those who had suffered from the Echo Canyon contamination and acknowledged the decades-long struggle for recognition. Alex's name was engraved alongside those who had tried to expose the truth and those who had paid the ultimate price for others' silence. They say wild horses never seek out humans unless something greater than instinct drives them, Chief Blackfeather remarked as they stood in contemplative silence. Your brother understood this. The Mustang remembered. Mason fingered the small wooden horse carving he now carried in his pocket. Do you think we'll ever know exactly why Ghost chose to find me? How he knew where to lead me? The chief smiled slightly. Does it matter? The result is the same. Mason recognized his own words till Lily echoed back to him. No, he agreed. I suppose it doesn't. As they left the memorial, Mason paused for one last look at the distant mountains, where both his brother's legacy and a remarkable Mustang had found their freedom. Science might explain parts of what had occurred, genetic memory, territorial instincts, coincidence, but some connections remained beyond full understanding. And perhaps that was, as it should be, a reminder that the natural world still held mysteries more profound than human knowledge could catalog, and bonds more enduring than time could erase. Mason turned toward the waiting group, his newfound family built not of blood, but of shared purpose. The Foster Ranch was slowly transforming under his care, becoming a sanctuary for retired working horses and the occasional rescued Mustang. Life had come full circle, returning him to a home he never expected to claim and a purpose he couldn't have imagined. All because a Mustang had appeared at his fence line one autumn day, bearing an invitation he couldn't explain, but thankfully hadn't refused. The following spring, Mason stood at the edge of the corral, watching as Lily examined a new arrival, a Mustang mare recently rescued from an overcrowded holding facility. Her gentle foal stood nearby, watching the proceedings with curious eyes. She'll be fine, Lily announced, straightening up from her examination. Just undernourished. A few weeks of good feed and she'll be healthy again. Mason nodded, his attention drawn to the foal. Something about the young horse's markings caught his eye, a distinctive pattern forming on its flank, familiar somehow. Look at this, Lily said, brushing back the foal's mane. Behind its ear was a small swirl of hair, forming a pattern that resembled the number 7. Mason felt a chill run through him, not unpleasant, but profound. What are the chances? Statistically, Lily smiled. Almost impossible. But I've learned some things defy statistics. The foal approached Mason cautiously, sniffing his outstretched hand. Its eyes were a warm brown now, but Lily had told him many foals' eyes changed color as they matured. What will you name it? She asked. Mason thought for a moment, remembering something Alex had written in his journal about Echo being more than just a horse, a whisper of something greater, a message carried across time. Whisper, he said. I think we'll call him Whisper. As if in response, a distant sound carried across the valley, the unmistakable call of a wild Mustang somewhere in the hills. Mason and Lily both turned toward the sound. Was that? Lily began. Maybe, Mason said, or just the wind. But later, when he visited the memorial stone that had been placed for Alex at the edge of the property, Mason couldn't help but feel a presence not supernatural, but a continuation of something that had never really ended. Some memories never truly leave us, he said quietly to the stone. They just find new ways to remind us they're still there. Behind him, Whisper nickered softly from the corral, amber eyes catching the late afternoon sun.